busted leg and broken head. Since I'd moved to North London, I'd been playing Sunday football for a team called TNS, Transylvanian National Squad. Don't ask because I don't know. They were a real mixed bunch of lads who liked to kick about on a Sunday morning without ever taking it too seriously. It was good banter and I enjoyed it so much that I ended up running the team for about 5 years. It was a pain in the arse, but someone had to do it, and if running the team meant that I could keep playing, then I was prepared to do the work. I had to do all the ringing around, chasing players, going to meetings with all the other clubs once a month, liaising with the council over our pitch and delivering the signed team sheets to league officials after games. I decided that the 1999-2000 season would be my last. I was 38 years old and starting to feel the pace of running on muddy pitches that were more suitable for growing cabbages than amateur sport. Early March I was playing in what would be my penultimate game before hanging up my boots and passing on the mantle to one of our younger players. We're short in numbers and can only field 11 players. It was a cold morning and parts of the pitch were frozen, but both sides were keen to play, so we kicked off. I should have known it was going to be a bad day when I got a free kick launched straight into my nose whilst I was in the defending wall. My nose was bleeding and I was more than a little dazed. I think if there had been a substitute I would have gone off and been replaced, but lack of numbers meant that I had to play on. In the second half I'm defending, facing my own goal and trying to tackle a guy on me right. I have to lead with my right leg and try to slide across in front of him. As I slide, my heel hits a lump of displaced frozen mud and my ankle bends sideways. I heard the snap. I lay on the floor and one of my teammates, Jamie, a guy the same age as me, comes over and lays across me to stop me from seeing my leg. I think that was your shin pad, mate. I don't think you've broken anything. One of our younger, less considerate players came bounding over and says, "He's fucking bust his leg. I heard it from over there. Sounded like a fucking pencil snapping." Jamie moved and I tried to lift my leg off the floor. My leg moved, but my ankle stayed on the ground. Strangely, I didn't feel any pain, but I think I may have been in shock. I get carried to the touchline and an ambulance is called. It arrives and I'm whisked off to Chase Farm Hospital in Enfield and enter an emergency ward dominated with lots of other injured footballers. There were no operations taking place on a Sunday unless it was an emergency, and a broken leg was not deemed an emergency. I was x-rayed and taken to a ward where he packed my ankle in ice until I could get a verdict in the morning. I'd broken my tibia cleanly and fractured my fibula and would require surgery to put me back together. The next morning the doctor comes around and takes a look. My foot's swollen to the size of a melon and he informs me that it can't be operated on until the swelling goes down. If they operated now, then the skin wouldn't be able to be stitched up because of the swelling, and this would increase the risk of infection. I was taking tramadol and was out me nut for most of that time, so I was in no pain. By Thursday it was deemed safe to operate. I come back from theatre with 2 metal plates and 9 screws holding my ankle together and some gruesome looking stitches. I'd be plastered and out in a couple of days, so I got used to hobbling around the ward on crutches and being taught how to climb up and down stairs with a busted foot. I came out a week after I went in and I was delighted to be home. However, my stay would be short. Within hours of being home, I was getting a burning sensation in my foot. I'd been told to keep it elevated, but every time I put it down, the blood had rushed to my foot and it felt like I was plunging it into boiling water. Claire was concerned at the pain I was in and insisted I went back to hospital where he took the cast off. My foot was black and blue and looked like a 10-pound sausage in a 5-pound skin. It had become infected and I had cellulitis, an infection of the skin cells. I'd need intravenous antibiotics to cure it, so I was readmitted to hospital. I was told it would take 2 or 3 days to cure. I'd end up being there for 10. It was the first time I'd ever stayed for any length of time in hospital and it took its toll on my usually upbeat demeanour. I had lots of visitors and got lots of nice gifts sent to me, but it did little to lift my spirits during the stay. I couldn't wait to be back home in my own bed, and I admit there was a small part of me looking forward to sitting on my arse for however long it would take for me to get back on my feet. Recovery was no picnic. I was home alone during the day and had plenty of time to contemplate. I can't explain how or why, but I just wasn't feeling myself. There were times when I burst into tears for nothing. I thought I was suffering from a bit of depression and went to see my doctor. My GP set up a meeting with a psychotherapist, but I'd have to wait about 4 weeks to see her. The wait was horrible. I was still crying for fuck all and felt like I couldn't be asked to do anything. In the week prior to my appointment, my mood picked up a little and I sensed I was moving from a trough to a peak, but I thought there was no harm in going to see the shrink. I went for my appointment with a French lady of mature years called Annick. She was very cool and very well dressed, and after giving her a brief explanation on my symptoms, she asked me to tell her what had happened to me in the previous 10 years. Luckily, this didn't include me Frankie years because she could have been there all day. I explained about the difficulties with the house being almost repossessed and having the stress of trying to bring up my family with limited resources. After listening patiently, she told me I was suffering from an echo of a crisis. During that difficult period, I hadn't really had the time to reflect on what I was experiencing, and now I was holed up with my leg in the air. This period had come back to haunt me. I wasn't aware of feeling like that, but her evaluation seemed plausible and reasonable. Even if it was incorrect, I believed her diagnosis at least put a handle on my emotions, and in the coming weeks I improved. None of those feelings have surfaced since, but my brief flirtation with depression definitely gave me an idea of what some people must be going through. I'd experienced no control over my feelings, and I was nowhere near being a chronic sufferer. The British still have that stiff upper lip and the Victorian reserve about sharing our feelings and displaying our emotions, and an attitude exists among a lot of people that sufferers should just snap out of it. If it were only that simple. Thankfully, my trough didn't go too deep, and my ascent from it was pretty rapid. It was the end of May before I was walking around without crutches, and having the freedom to walk unaided was not the only thing that put a smile on my face. During my recuperation, I was made aware via the Frankie fan forum about a band tour in America calling itself Frankie Goes to Hollywood. They were playing state fairs and even had the balls to release an album of their own material under a Frankie name. I tried to buy the album via the internet, and the lead singer, Davy Johnson, recognised my name and contacted me to plead his case. I'd read on the forum that he was claiming to be Holly's brother. He opened his email with the claim that his band was not trying to pass itself off as Frankie. Really? I thought that's exactly what you were doing. He then went on to claim that he'd checked Frankie sales and noted that our record sales were up almost 40%, stating that this was due to his band's hard work and nothing to do with the recent re-released tracks. He closed by saying he'd listened to my song clips from my album and thought it was very good and well written, and if I wanted to send him some copies, then he'd gladly sell them on at their shows and send me the money. Did he think I'd just come down with the last drop of rain? David Prince, a journalist working for Spin magazine, would expose Davy's little scam a few months later. He arranged to meet them and gave them the impression that he believed they were the real deal. At the end of the interview, he informed them that he knew they were fakes because he was a Frankie fan and he'd been in attendance at the famous Bismarck show in Chicago that I mentioned earlier. I wish I could have been there when he dropped the bomb. The other thing that put a smile on my face was the possibility of getting a job as a breakfast DJ for a radio station in Cambridge. I'd visited the station to appear on a show hosted by a lady called Simone. She liked me stuff and invited me to perform at the station's firework display in the previous November. I went to Cambridge for an interview with the station manager. I think his name was Julian, and he was a bit of a toff. The show would be 7 a.m. to 9 a.m, and I'd share it with a female presenter called Kirsten. The interview went well, and we even got as far as recording the show to play to a focus group of listeners. Simone told me the focus group liked me, but thought she was a bit annoying. In the end, I didn't get the gig. I wasn't deemed local enough to host regional radio. It was probably just as well, because it would have meant me getting up at 5 in the morning to get to Cambridge for 7. I don't think I could have maintained the necessary joy required for the job with those hours. Despite being on crutches, I'd been travelling to the studio by bus and had begun recording some new songs. The experience of playing with musicians instead of machines when recording Ripe had convinced me that I should return to Tim's studio and try and gather the Welsh boys together for a session. I was delighted to book the time and couldn't wait to get in there. In the past, the guys had been restricted by the arrangements I had laid down for Ripe, but this time I would get their input right from the start. I would record the backing tracks with them and then bring the results back to Big Top and do the vocals and any overdubs. I was staying with Wal, and as the weather was nice, we travelled to the studio on his motorbike, taking the mountain route. This was great for the first 2 days, but on the third day it was raining when we came to leave, and the only other waterproofs that Wal had belonged to his wife Ren, so I had two choices. Get drenched on the way home, or squeeze my ample frame into green waterproofs made for a woman much smaller than myself. I got them on and looked ridiculous. We set off, and on the way, Wal decides to stop for some gas, and I climb off the bike. I was soaked despite the weatherproof gear I was wearing. When we eventually got back to Wales, he confessed that he didn't really need petrol, and he'd only stopped in the hope that I'd be seen by some late night passers-by, dressed like a fucking idiot, sporting a large damp patch that spread all across me groin, giving me the look of an incontinent road dog. Me trousers were the only pair I'd brought, so I dried them overnight, but when I put them on the next morning, they'd dried, leaving a white stained border all around me groin where the damp patch had been. I had to travel home on the train looking like Mr. Piss Pants. Nothing could dampen me mood though, because the recording had gone so well, and I had 7 backing tracks for what would become Le Grand Fromage. The rest of the tracks could be recorded at Big Top because they weren't reliant on having the band as a spine. I was back in Wales just before Christmas to appear on Welsh TV. Very strange to be on a Welsh TV show and hearing people slide between the two languages. I guess it's the only time you'd be in Wales and consider it a foreign country. The vocals were live, and although the backing track was supplied, the boys backed me on the show. Playing with them was always wicked because they cruised like a Rolls Royce, but it was impractical to be living in London with my band in Wales. There were times when Tony Kiley and Wal couldn't make it, but luckily there were Welsh replacements in the guise of Ryan Aston and Aid Bamford, and they slotted in almost seamlessly. I wish that I had a band that was closer to home though, so we had more time to work on the live arrangements of the songs and develop a stage show. I recall doing one gig with the boys at the Flying Picket that was a little different. A bunch of Frankie fans from the message boards descended on Liverpool for the gig, and by way of a thank you I decided to meet up with them at the hotel the following morning and show them round my hometown. What a bizarre looking group we must have looked. This was the first time I'd met some of these people. I'm happy to say some of them have become friends over the years. I led them on a tour of the city that started at the Cells and ended with a ferry on the Mersey, with all of us joined in a chorus of the Marsden Classic whilst we surveyed the Liverpool waterfront. In the initial years of having the studio, I'd been trying to run it commercially and I'd recorded a few bands, but the work was not worth the reward. It didn't seem to matter what equipment you had or how much space you had. The costs were determined by what the opposition were charging, and that amounted to about £12 an hour. I could earn at least twice that being a freelance electrician, and it was much less stressful than trying to record bands that couldn't play and wanted to come out sounding like Oasis. I know everyone's got to start somewhere, but that somewhere was not going to be Big Top. I remember this one nutcase who came in to record some acoustic tracks. He'd dropped out of university, but not before he'd rinsed every high street bank for a student loan. These loans went towards paying for my studio and funded his other pastime of smoking ridiculously strong weed. I remember the drummer not being too impressed with his drum sound after I'd spent an hour making it sound half decent. He listened and pulled a face. "What do you expect, dickhead? Your snare drum sounds like someone banging a wet kipper on a bog seat." I decided that trying to run the studio as a business was not for me, so I'd only record friends' bands and do them a favour. This still applies today. I find it hard enough to escape up there myself, and the precious time I do get has to be spent doing my own music, or at least friends' music that I enjoy. There was one session though that would lead me to find a new band of musicians. I met a guy called Yash through my mate Phil Harris. Yash's boy Dino was a keen guitarist, and his band had been in my studio to do a little demo. They were school kids and a bit green, but they could play, so recording them was no grief. They had a young girl called Sharice playing drums who must have been about 12 or 13, and she really had the makings of being a tidy drummer. I told her to keep at it because everybody would love to have a funky female drummer, myself included. She did stick at it and is now currently touring the world with Mika and Brian Ferry. Yash was pleased that I had helped out and invited me to a gig in his back garden. Yash stock would feature Dino's band and a load of other bands from the Palmer's Green area of North London. One of these bands was called Evo Diablo and featured the Sweeney brothers Dan and Niall in the rhythm section, Dino's guitar teacher Noel, and a raunchy girl singer called Laura. They were playing cover versions of songs by Zeppelin, the Chili Peppers, Rage Against the Machine, and they sounded really good. I went to check them out the following week at a venue where they were a house band, and as I heard them delivering great versions of these covers, I had a thought. Well, if they can play Zeppelin like Zeppelin, then surely they can play Nasher and make it sound like Nasher. They were virtually on my doorstep, and from initial meetings I thought they were all really cool guys. A seed was planted, and in the back of my mind I was already formulating a plan to have these guys get on board for the promotion of the new album. Le Grand Fromage was taking shape, but it was taking longer than I anticipated, and I was relying on other musicians donating their time for free. I had an idea to do one of the tracks, In Bloom, as a duet, and asked Mitt if he could pass on Sam Brown's address. Sam was singing with Jules Holland on his TV show and had been touring with Pink Floyd. She was a fantastic singer, and I sent her a copy of the track with a short letter. I didn't hear anything for months and I thought it wasn't going to happen, then a letter turned up. Sam liked the track and hoped she wasn't too late to do it, and we arranged for her to call into the studio to record a part. What a lovely woman, and what she did to the track was absolutely perfect. I was set up to record everything from the off, and I'm so glad I did. Sometimes you let people get a feel for the song with a few run-throughs before hitting the red button, but I wanted to capture everything just in case. All of her takes were amazing, but as she got more comfortable, she expressed herself a bit more, but the first two takes were the ones for me. The vocal was a little unsure and understated, and absolutely perfect. I was chuffed with myself for being on the ball enough to capture it all. The track is still my favourite on the album. A new album, close to completion, a possible new band in the dressing room. Everything was looking up. I didn't know that there was a bombshell just around the corner.